I ended up almost replacing my full-time salary within 2 months. And
That is
I'll
incredible.
talk, we can talk a little bit more about that and how I got to that so quickly. But since that time, I see freelancing for me as a very stable way to earn an income, or at least a less risky way. Because if I lose one client, it's a fraction of my total income. Whereas when I lost my job, that was everything. That was my whole salary.
This is The Anonymous Marketer, a podcast where we tackle the biggest questions from the B2B marketing community. But instead of bringing on guests for a quick chat, every question comes from an anonymous source. These are the questions B2B marketers have, but are afraid to ask. Let's start the conversation.
Hello, and welcome to The Anonymous Marketer. I'm your host, Kirsty Lang, and today we are talking about how to get yourself started as a freelance marketer or consultant. Joining me today is someone I've been following for years and have heard brilliant things about from everyone that she has worked with, Anna Burgess.
Thank you much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
It is great to have you, Anna. If you could see us laughing right now, I completely fudged the first intro. And so this is our second take, and Anna's being very patient with me. But yeah, we had a good giggle already. So the show is already off to a great start with Kirsty's bloopers. But anyway, Anna, thank you. I appreciate you for making time today. If you have consumed content in tech or fintech, you have probably read some words written by Anna. She's created content for brands like Zapier, Mixpanel, and of course Buffer, where I work. But yeah, before we get into today's questions, some housekeeping. The show is called The Anonymous Marketer because we take questions from marketers without revealing their identities. Groundbreaking. In order to submit a question for the show, you can go to marketersindemand.com/anonymous, and you will see a form where you can tell us a little bit about the biggest challenge you are facing right now. And I will invite an expert like Anna on to give us their take on a solution. So on to the question for today's show. Whew, here it is. It's a juicy one. I feel like I say that every episode, but we get some really good questions. So I'm no longer enjoying my current role, but I'm battling to find a new one. I love the idea of going freelance, but I'm scared. Where do I even start? I'm a senior level jack of all trades marketer, and I've done everything from content marketing to growth marketing. Thanks. So this person works in tech at a company with 11 to 50 employees and a marketing team of 6 to 10. Anna, before we dig into that, I want to talk some more about your journey to freelance and becoming a solopreneur, because I think that will really give us some important context and probably already help us get some advice for our anonymous marketer. So tell us a little bit about that, please.
So my journey into content is I spent 15 years working at a financial technology company, not doing content or anything related to marketing. I was a product manager and the director of the customer success team. And then in late 2020, I decided I wanted to just do something completely different. I wanted to quit my job. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I did not even know content marketing was a job that people paid you to do. Truly, I didn't. The company I was at had an outside agency that they were using that produced blog posts occasionally. They were terrible, but I didn't know like content marketing existed by itself. So I was just kind of looking at job boards and trying to figure out what do I want to do with my life. And I came across an agency that was hiring freelance writers. So I did some of that. And then eventually in early 2021, I landed a role at a content marketing agency as a content marketing manager. And I worked at agencies for 18 months and then lost my job, as many people did in 2022. Yeah. And rather than look for another role as a content marketer, I decided to go out on my own. So now I've been doing that for 15 months now as a freelance content marketer.
I think it is a testament to how good you are that I thought you had been a freelance content marketer for much longer. I thought it had been much longer than that. I actually didn't realize it was such a recent change. But I'm really glad about that because I feel like you'll be able to speak to, it's going to be fresh, right? The decisions you made
Sure.
Yeah, everything you
And
went through.
I'll clarify too. I have been freelancing for longer. So even while
Okay.
I was at content agencies, I was freelancing on the side. It just wasn't my primary source of income. And that may speak to this person's question as well,
Yeah.
with how to kind of do a little bit of both to get a feel for it before you make that leap into doing freelancing full
Yeah.
time.
I want to go back to something you said about kind of you saw when you were looking to leave your role in 2020, you saw that freelance writing job advertised. What made you decide to do that? Is writing something you've always loved or been really good at? Obviously, I think you're born with a talent like yours.
So I have always considered myself a writer. I was an English major in college. That was a
Hmm.
while ago. And back
Me too.
then, content marketing definitely did not exist. Like that was not a job. So when I
Mm.
graduated, the options seemed to be either work as a journalist or write, if there were some online publications at the time, or write a book. And neither of those were
Casual.
really appealing to me. Yeah. So
Mm.
I I decided to just go into something completely different and ended up in financial technology. Meanwhile, I had maintained just a personal blog. It never really went anywhere. It was meaningful for
Mm.
me, but didn't really think about writing as a career. Didn't think that it was a well-paying job, as I've now learned it
Yeah.
can be for people who are good at writing. And so, and the first role I took as just a freelance writer for this agency, the pay was terrible. It was a total content mill. So
Yeah.
I still didn't really believe that content marketing was a viable career. It was just a
Mm.
way to build a portfolio until I was hired full time at an agency. So, yes, to answer your question, yes, I have always considered myself a writer. Obviously, content marketing is very different, but
Mm.
I think to not use a cliche word, but I take a storytelling approach. I take a journalism
Mm.
approach. I want to write stuff that people want to read. So
Yeah.
that probably has lent itself well to building a career in content marketing, even though I haven't been in content marketing for very long.
Yeah, I think that is the key, right? That is what sets good content marketers apart from great content marketers. Like you can be the top of the search results. I know we're going off on a tangent here, but this is something I feel so strongly about and love talking about. But you can be the top of the search results because you have nailed SEO and written the most painfully boring story. And I think so often we forget that we're writing for people, not Google. Anyway, and it is a real skill to nail both. So yeah, that's clearly why you're so amazing
Right.
at what you are. It is such a game changer in B2B content marketing,
Right. And
particularly. But anyway,
it didn't hurt that I was in a very specialized field, and that was just
absolutely.
coincidence or luck. But financial technology is a very niche industry. It has a lot of regulations. The people who are reading it are highly knowledgeable. And so,
Yeah.
because I had that background, when people were finding me as a freelance writer, they were looking for something very specific. And, they may have tried an agency, they may have tried a freelancer before, or even
Mm,
hired in house and just couldn't find somebody with that type of knowledge. So that certainly didn't hurt when I made that
yeah,
leap from
absolutely.
in house as an agency to full time as a freelancer.
Absolutely. And that is something that you can tell, right? When you're reading content marketing that's been written by someone who's done their research but doesn't fully understand what they're talking about. That's also one of my pet peeves. But anyway, coming back to the question at hand, I think it is such a good one because, I mean, the job market is what it is. People are looking for other options, especially in marketing. I feel like I see, folks being let go every day on LinkedIn. And it's so hard because there's not a lot of great jobs out there. When I was looking for jobs, at one point I was scraping the barrel. I was, looking at stuff that didn't kind of match my expertise and companies I didn't really align with, but you kind of forget when you're in that kind of relentless job hunt that there is another option, which is working fractionally or as a freelancer or consultant. Yeah. So I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about what your first steps were to set yourself up when you made the
Yeah.
decision, right, I'm not going to be in-house anymore. I'm going it alone.
So it was significantly driven for financial reasons. I
Yeah.
lost my job. The market was terrible. I didn't know how long it would take to find another job. So, but I had probably 2 steady freelance clients at that time. And I thought I could, let's see. Let's see if I can increase my freelance income and do this. I told my spouse I would give it 6 months and see what happens. And
Okay.
if I couldn't
That's a
build up a
relatively
freelance
short
business,
time.
I would try to, well, but I'm married. I have 3 kids. I live in a
Yeah.
suburb of Chicago. I have a house. And so it was, I wouldn't be able to survive for a long time on
Yeah.
a small income. I needed to be
Absolutely.
able to pull in something resembling the salary that I had before. So I said, I'll give it 6 months. But it's, I thought, if I could tell that it wasn't going well, I would start applying, far before that 6 month
Mm,
time period. But I ended up almost replacing my full time salary within 2 months. And
that is
I'll talk,
incredible.
we can talk a little bit more about that and how I got to that so quickly. But since that time, I see freelancing for me as a very stable way to earn an income, or at least a less risky way. Because if I lose one client, it's a fraction of my total income. Whereas if when I
Yeah.
lost my job, that was everything. That was my whole salary. And I just happened to have freelance clients on the side. So that protected me in some way. People always say self employment is risky. I
Yeah.
truly believe that. I could not see myself as self employed, years ago. But now I see it as a less risky option compared to some full time jobs.
Yeah. Oh man, you've just unlocked something for me there. I've always kind of been like, yeah, I mean, when I was, knee deep in my job search, I was like, this is just not working. I'm not going to find something that is a good fit for me, or just find, a company that is keen on me. Like it's so difficult when you're in that like quagmire of trying to figure out what the heck am I going to do now. But freelancing was just too scary because I was like, it's not stable enough. I need to, as you say, I'm part of a dual income household, and I needed to provide for my family. I needed to be earning what I was earning at my previous job. So yeah, I mean, the idea of freelancing was just, it's not stable enough. I'm too nervous to do it. Yeah, sorry. You've just unlocked something for me there. So that's really, really exciting to hear. If you were starting today and knowing what you know now, what would be the first steps that you would take? I think it's probably safe to assume that this person doesn't have any kind of freelance gigs on the side. Well,
Yeah.
let's assume that they haven't got anything like that.
So I set myself up for success without really knowing it quite a bit before I made the leap. And so if somebody is at an in-house job today or at an agency today, rather than just leaping out into the unknown, because it is hard to get clients.
Yeah.
So I use LinkedIn a lot. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. And probably about 18 months before I started freelancing full time, I decided to really up my LinkedIn game. I went from posting once a week with whatever popped into my head that morning to very consistently showing up on LinkedIn, talking about sometimes marketing, sometimes remote work, sometimes my past experiences from my pre content life, but just talking and connecting with other people in the marketing industry. And so by
Okay.
doing that and doing that very, very consistently, I was showing up in people's feeds, or at least I assume I was, based on how my
Yeah.
understanding of the LinkedIn algorithm works. So people were seeing me. My name was out there. I was working on my portfolio site as a
Mm.
freelancer and things like that. So by the time I made the leap to full time and made a little announcement on LinkedIn, like, hey, I'm going to
Yeah.
start freelancing, I had a substantial network. And that I think made a huge difference. I had people reach out to me, people in my network referred me to other people, and those became
Mm.
some of my first freelance clients. That's
Amazing.
one approach. I am not big on cold emailing or sending cold DMs. I just think I'm terrible at it. So for me, that was much that was preferable. People were
Yeah.
coming to me because they were interested in my work rather than reaching out to somebody who may have no idea who I am and may not even have a need for a freelancer.
Mm.
So I would say, that is a huge first step, is to do that type of networking and putting yourself out there in advance if you can, so that when you make the leap and maybe you only start out with 1 or 2 clients, but it'll ramp up more quickly than not having an online presence and then trying to get clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I love your point about LinkedIn because it is, I don't know, it feels like it's such a game changer, both in trying to set yourself up as a freelancer or consultant and, if you're looking for work as well. I really think I wouldn't have landed where I am at Buffett without having consistently created content on LinkedIn. It is huge and building up that network. And I think as a marketer, you're almost at an advantage, right? Because you can treat yourself like a campaign. um, come up with a campaign for yourself. I think it can be, intimidating to kind of think, oh, I'm going to build a personal brand. And I know people kind of feel a bit gross about that word as well. So yeah, if you kind of treat yourself like a campaign or, something like a product that you're marketing, I mean, that is effectively what you're doing. You don't want to come across as too salesy. You do want to be human and sharing your authentic experiences and connecting with real people in real ways. I know we talk about that a lot in marketing right now, but it's not just lip service. It makes a difference. I wonder if you can kind of talk to that content mix that you kind of do on LinkedIn now, because I've seen a lot of both. So your work, your experience, you talk a lot about workflows, which I love because I'm obsessed with tools. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your content pillars.
So it's a mix. I do that on purpose. I'm just not an overly self-promotional person. That's just not my style. So I want to talk about things that I think people are interested in. And some of that is freelancing. And while it may not appeal to people that would hire me, it does show that I'm taking my business seriously. Maybe a
Yeah.
client doesn't care like how I organize my time, or maybe they do care and they say, oh yeah, she's really organized. We're not going to have to babysit her. She'll be able to, we can give her a piece of content and then we'll get a draft back on the day that it's due. So, but that content also then appeals to fellow freelancers. And I do that mostly because I like to be helpful, especially with earlier stage freelancers.
Yeah.
I talk about remote work a lot just because it's a topic that I'm passionate about. And so I think that enthusiasm comes through in what I write, what I post about. But one of my biggest things that I do on LinkedIn is actually repurpose my own content. So
Yes.
part of my strategy has been to comment on other people's posts. They're people in the industry, people I find interesting, things like that. So I spend time every day commenting. Then once a month, I export my comments from LinkedIn, which is possible under the data and privacy settings. So when I do that, I export.
I didn't know you could do that. What a hack.
Yeah. So you export your comments and you'll get a CSV of all of your comments. And then I will turn my comments into my own posts. So I've said something before. I already had the idea. I'll just turn it into something longer. So I'll look at what comments did I make over the past month. And that takes you very quickly from I'm posting 2 times a week of an original idea to I'm posting 10 times a week, 2 times a day, because it's a mix of new ideas and things I said on other people's posts, which become new when I'm now posting them to my audience on LinkedIn. So I've been doing that for a long time, using my own comments as net new content. And it really becomes, people get stuck, especially if you're trying to produce a high volume on LinkedIn. They're like, I don't even know what to say. I don't have that many unique ideas. But by commenting and then turning it into your own post, it's like, oh, okay, I do have those ideas. So that has worked really well for me and allowed me to kind of like scale my own LinkedIn presence.
I love that because you're almost stress testing the idea before putting it out, kind of as a main post from you. You can see how people react to it in the comments, see if the topic itself is interesting, because if the original poster got a whole lot of engagement, that's obviously something people want to talk about. That I so often will comment something and think, This is really, really good. I need to turn this into a post and then completely forget about it. So your idea or your system of downloading CSVs. Have you done a LinkedIn post on this? Because I think it would be a
I
great one.
have. I have, but it's
Of
been a
course.
while. It's on my to-do list, and maybe now that we're talking about it, I'll actually do it in real life, is to create a video showing like how I do that.
Yeah.
But I just like haven't had time or don't prioritize it, but I should, because when I mention it on LinkedIn, which I have done a few times, people will be like, "What? I didn't even know you could export your comments," or, what an easy way to do it. A lot of people have figured out, yes, turn your comments into posts, but then they'll have to like go back at their own LinkedIn profile and like
Yeah.
scroll through their feed and find those posts and then copy them and save them elsewhere, which is
LinkedIn
just a
doesn't make it
chore.
easy.
But you can download them from LinkedIn. And then what I do is I use Trello to plan my own content. I can import that CSV into Trello, or if you're using Notion or any project management tool that allows the import of a CSV,
Yeah.
it's really then easy to do that and actually incorporate those comments into your project management system.
Oh man, that is such a good hack. I'm going to do this today. I'm going to export that CSV and batch prep some content because my content ideas are dwindling, and it's very early in the year for that to be happening. So back to the kind of the nitty-gritty of stuff. I think I know people will be like, yeah, LinkedIn, cool. What other practicalities do you need? And so it's kind of, I'm thinking things like setting up a website. Like, is that essential from day one? Figuring out your pricing, like all of these kind of pieces of the puzzle. Where do you start with them?
So I think one thing that's really important for freelancers, and I've talked about this with other freelancers quite a bit, is you have to think of it like a business. You're not just producing a deliverable for a client. Obviously, that's a huge part of it, but you are running a business. So you have to think about sales, like managing a pipeline of potential
Yeah.
clients. You have to think about pricing. Obviously, that's part of sales, contracts, accounting. I have to keep track of my income and my expenses for tax purposes. Yes, a website, part of that, marketing, having a portfolio site. And so, and project management, that's a huge part of it. I most of my work is ad hoc. I don't do a lot of retainers, and we can talk about that as well, and why
Yeah.
I like to run my business that way. But I have to be able to like keep track of the work. I have to be able to keep track of the payments that are due to me. And so setting up project management was also very important in running a business. And there are a lot of inexpensive tools out there. It's not necessarily something you need to invest a ton to get started, but those are all things that someone looking at freelancing needs to think about, is how am I actually going to build this? As far as website, I think my web homepage is just a one pager, and Card is the site that I use. And then I have a separate portfolio site that's very easy to maintain through Journo Portfolio, but there are several out there. But yes, I think that's pretty critical for a freelancer, because you have to be able to showcase your work. You have to be able to say, like, these are the clients I've worked with. If you want to see a sample, at this point, when people reach out to me, it is very clear that they've already reviewed my portfolio. They'll either say it, or they'll say, I know you write about X, Y, and Z topics. So I would say the more you can work on building that portfolio, the better position you'll be in, because it's basically show your work, right? Like, I can do this. I'm not just talking about it. I actually can deliver.
Yeah. On that portfolio note, just a very gratuitous bit of self-promotion there. I have recently published an episode with Eric Martin, who spoke a little bit about setting up a portfolio, and he had some great advice as well. So definitely check that out if this is something that you are looking to do. Yeah, Anna, I want to talk about pricing. First of all, how do you decide? I think this was like the biggest kind of sticking point for me when I went down that path in my head. Okay, I want to freelance. I don't want to freelance. Can I freelance? Is how much can I charge? Where do you get that kind of information? Is it, you're kind of chatting to other freelancers, or, what was your story?
So two things. One, I was connected with some other people, content marketers mostly, that a lot of them had lost their jobs or just decided they didn't want to be in-house anymore. And so they were freelancing.
Yeah.
So they kind of gave me an idea of what they were charging. Also, I had worked at 2 marketing agencies and I knew what they were charging their clients. And so that gave me a lot of insight into what people were willing to pay. So, and I mean, my first content job at a content mill was 2 cents a word. I literally had no idea what people could charge. Around or at the same time that I got my first content agency job full time, I was also offered a role at a industry publication in banking, which is my background. And the editor offered me 50 cents a word. And I was like, oh, well, that's a lot better than 2 cents a word. So that became my new benchmark when I started working with other freelance clients. I'm like, well, clearly I must be worth 50 cents a word. And then, like about a year later, I was offered a role at a industry publication that offered me $1 a word. I'm like, okay, so that's where the work is worth. It does depend a lot on the industry, I think. Yeah. So, so I had some external cues, I think, as to what people do pay. And I have different tiers of pricing based on basically the type of client I'm working with.
Okay,
is it fintech, which is incredibly specialized? That's worth more. Is it, kind of a SaaS company that can still benefit from my expertise? Or am I writing for a content agency, which I still do, but they have overhead and I'm not dealing directly with the client. The agency is paying me, not the client. So there's a degree of separation there, which benefits me. So I charge less to agencies than I do when I work with clients directly, just because, I'm taking that into account. So I charge per word. A lot of freelancers charge a flat rate. I found that to be very tricky. I had pricing for a while that was, if it's between 1,000 and 1,500 words, it's this amount. If it's between 1,500 and 2,000, it's this amount. And then I'd get like these weird, like kind of in between, like, well, what if it is exactly 1,500 words?
Yeah.
Is it the 1,000 to 1,500 or is it the 1,500 to 2,000? So that type of stuff kept coming up. Or it would be like, okay, now we want 800 to 1,200. So now it's like between my 2 buckets of pricing. It came up all the time that my buckets just didn't work for whatever that particular client was wanting. So I'm like, whatever, I'll just charge per word.
Okay. That's really good to know. In terms of talking about fees and kind of, being your own accountant and knowing when money is due to you and, pricing, negotiating prices, I would imagine that you have had to have some very difficult conversations about money with people. How do you navigate that as someone who hates talking about money? How do you push back and say, actually, no, sorry, my work is worth more than you're willing to offer? Or, excuse me, you haven't paid me yet. You owe me for my work.
Yeah. So when I was new to freelancing, I was willing to negotiate more than I am now.
Yeah.
One of the easiest tactics I would say for negotiating on price is to negotiate scope. So they have a budget, they're willing to pay X amount. I don't want to work for X amount, but we could maybe decrease the scope and say, okay, well, you're going to get me really detailed briefs, for example. And so I'm not doing as much work on my end. Another thing is negotiating. I do a lot of live interviews. And so, well, maybe I'm not doing the interview, they're doing the interview and they're giving me the transcript. So those are all ways to kind of, there's ways to kind of change the scope. And so you're doing less work if you're not that far off in pricing. If you're really far off, I'm not a fan, and I'm in a position to do that now where I'll just walk away. It's not worth it to me to work for a lot less. They'll say, you're too expensive. And my approach is, I'm not within your budget. So, and that's just a way to frame it. It's like your budget is different from what I charge. So that's one thing. The other is, on the other end, collecting money. It is kind of terrible. I use an accounting system called Wave, which sends auto reminders at 3 days past due, 7 days past due, 14 days past due. So
I like that. That's
those
really
just go
cool.
out automatically. And that's helpful because then it's a little bit like more impersonal. Like I'm not having to send
Yeah.
the email. And a lot of times it's just they forgot or whatever, and I'll get paid right away. I am lucky. I live in the state of Illinois in the United States, which has going into effect this year, has the Freelance Workers Protection Act. New York State and the US also has such a thing where clients can actually end up owing the freelancer double of the original invoice if they're not paid on time. So I'm
That
thrilled
is
once that
amazing.
goes into effect, I will have
I'm moving to
additional
Chicago.
protections as a freelancer. Right.
That's
um,
incredible.
and that applies whether the freelancer is based in the state or if the client is based in the state, as far as I know. So,
Okay.
like if you have a client based in New York, they would also be subject to the New York version of that. And I believe there's a couple specific cities, like a Los Angeles in the US, that also have this in place. So hopefully that catches on. But it is really limited right now, at least in the US, as far as what you need to do. I don't have a good answer for what happens if a client completely doesn't pay you. It's happened to me once. It was when I was
Oh,
really
wow.
early in my freelancing career. The client just flat out ghosted me and didn't pay.
That's horrifying.
Other than that, my contract states that the work belongs to me until I am paid for it. So, if a client published my work and didn't pay me, that would obviously be a problem. I've had one time a client say the work didn't meet expectations, and rather than ask me to redo it, they just flat out didn't pay me. So I'm kind of like, that's not how that works either. So those become uncomfortable conversations. Fortunately, I think the types of clients I work with, for the most part, they have, formal marketing departments. They have formal accounts payable departments. I have a contract in place, so I could go to an attorney if I ever needed to. And so I think those are all things that you can do to protect yourself. And usually the uncomfortable conversation results in me getting paid. It's like, hey, you got to pay me.
I want to come back to something you've just said because it's something that makes so much sense. It's something I had not considered at all, is the idea of a contract. So do you make all of your clients sign a contract before you undertake any
Yes.
work? Okay. And in drafting that, did you get help? Or?
So sometimes it's my contract, sometimes it's their contract. When I work with larger companies, they may already have a freelancer agreement in place or that they've drafted. And so I'll just review it and I will sign theirs. Half the time, it's probably my contract. I started with a contract that I found online. I actually do have a background in contract writing. I did it a lot when I was at the financial technology company. So that helped. I'm not going to lie, with knowing how to protect myself, right? Yeah. For example, payment is due to me upon delivery of a first draft, not upon the client reviewing it. Because there are certainly companies that'll take 2 weeks or more to review a draft. And why should I have to wait to get paid? Absolutely. I've already done the work, especially if the end result is, this is great, thank you. So, that's one thing that I knew from working and drafting contracts before is you can't wait for the thumbs up. Or, you could write into a contract upon approval or within 1 week, whichever comes first. So that you're not waiting. I have things in there like I'm allowed to promote the work on my website. That's pretty big for a freelancer. There are a few clients that, will ask me to strike that, and I'll do that. There are some that have non-disclosure agreements. I have to honor those. But for the most part, I have to be able to use their work to promote my work. It's critical. Yeah. So, I have things in the contract about that. But, for the most part, it's trial and error. Not trial and error, but I update the contract as things come up. So if I get into a sticky situation or I end up doing way more work than I'd anticipated, I'm like, okay, now I need to update my contract to clarify what I do and what I don't do so that I don't hit this situation again. Yeah. So I'm making edits to my contract as those things come up.
What kinds of things have you added relatively recently, if you don't mind sharing?
I can't think of anything really recently. Limiting like the number of interviews that I'll do per word count would be an example.
Okay. There's nothing worse than
One
having
live
too
interview per
much.
1,500 words, that type of thing. In some cases, I've had clients, this is one I'm going to add this year. I've had clients that they'll conduct interviews and then they'll give me 3 interviews to listen to for 1,300 words, like, or 1,500 words. And yes, I didn't do those myself, but that is a lot of time on my end to listen to 3-hour-long interviews and, pull out the highlights from the transcript. So it's not really saving me a ton of time not to do it myself. So,
Exactly.
I'm going to think about what does that look like when I receive interviews that are disproportionate to the word count, and like, what does that look like? So it's a lot of times it's just protecting my time. Another one is getting dragged into internal meetings or things like that. Like, I'm not scoped to
Interesting.
just sit in on brainstorming sessions and things like that. So,
Yeah.
um, those are, I'm a supplement to a top marketing team. I'm happy to sit in on those meetings, but I have to account for the time that's involved and what is my
Yeah.
time worth when I'm pulled into meetings like that.
Exactly. That's more of a consulting as well, when they're kind of asking you for your input and things that are not necessarily related to the specific piece you're working on, for example.
Right. Or getting dragged into a meeting that really is just an internal problem and it really isn't related to me at all. If I figure
Maybe
talking
Anna
about
will solve
distribution
this.
of an asset or something like that, like, that's not really on me. I'm just here to like talk about where the project is at, but it's not a good use of my time. I'm happy to do it, but I need to kind of factor that in.
Okay, that is brilliant, Anna. Thank you. I remember the random in the weeds question that I wanted to ask, and I mean, this is. I'm just super curious about this. The words that you get paid for, is that the final draft or the initial draft that you send in?
So I price it based on target word count rather than final.
Okay.
So let's say it's 1,200 words and I come in at 1187 or 1253. I just invoice on 1,200. It's just not worth it to me to track every single word. I'm pretty
Yeah.
good about coming as close as possible. I don't want to come in too low because then the client doesn't feel like they got their money's worth. I don't want to come in too high because now I'm giving away free work. So I do try to come
Yeah.
in reasonably close to the word count. Um,
Okay.
if it's really low for some reason, I will invoice lower because I want to be fair to the client. So I will let
Yeah.
them know. I'll be like, I don't want to word stuff. I gave it a lot lower. If I come in a lot higher, I will invoice for the additional word count. And sometimes that's after the fact. I will have already invoiced for the first draft. They'll ask for revisions. It ends up coming in like several hundred words more. I'll just send another invoice for the difference between the two. Um,
Okay.
that's only happened a few times where it's like, we really want a whole additional section here. Or,
Mhm.
it just ended up being a lot more. But for the most part, I'm just invoicing on target word count. If the word count is a range, I'll invoice in the middle. So if it's like, 1,200 to 1,400 words, I might invoice at 1,300 or something like that, especially if it's a large range. But basically, I'm not tracking every single word. It's not worth it to me. I assume that the ones that are low and the ones that are high, they all kind of even out.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much for wading into the weeds with me there. Anna, that is everything that I wanted to ask, aside from kind of one wrap up question. I don't want folks to kind of approach this with rose colored glasses, rose tinted glasses, but I think from this discussion, they'll have understood that freelancing is amazing, but also there's a lot of things to consider that you don't have to think about when you are an in-house employee. So I was hoping you could kind of give us a little roundup of what you think the pros are and what the cons are of going freelance.
So definitely the pros are what I mentioned before, which is for me less risky. That even though my income is variable every month, it's never zero. And at this point for me, there's only slight fluctuations from one month to the next. The cons would be for people who don't like the business aspect. I don't mind it. I am comfortable, managing my own finances, budget, project management. Those are just skills that I had on the side, so to speak. And even self-promotion, or publishing on LinkedIn. If people really hate those types of things, freelancing is not a good idea, because you have to think of yourself as every single role within an organization of one. And if you hate sales, if you hate talking to prospects, if you hate talking about money, if the idea of asking people for money makes you want to throw up a little bit, or, the idea of tracking your money and reporting on your taxes is terrifying for you and you can't afford to pay an outside person, those are all things that are pretty critical. Project management is critical. If you don't have those skills and you're interested in freelancing, you're going to have to get those skills very, very fast. Because one thing that clients tell me is I'm very dependable as a freelancer. I turn in the work on time. I'm very clear about what the turnaround time is. And if I'm not available for a period of time, I didn't realize that sets me apart from other freelancers. I guess a lot of freelancers out there don't turn in work on time, or they're not clear. And so, but part of that is because I project management myself. Everything. Everything that I'm working on, my payments, my deliverables, everything. And so if you can't keep track of, I've got 15 things due in the next 2 weeks, and which one do I prioritize? That's going to be very hard. And that can be a really steep learning curve. I will say that because I ramped up from having freelance clients on the side, it's not like I went from 0 to 100. I went from 0, 2 clients to 4 clients to 6 clients, et cetera. And so, but I built a project management system as soon as I had 2 clients. As soon as I had more than one, I needed to figure out how to manage that work. So that's kind of my other suggestion, is you've got to plan to scale before you get to scale, or you will feel overwhelmed. And if any of those things that I've mentioned sound terrifying or horrifying, freelancing is not the right thing, because it is a very real part of running a freelance business.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that reality check. I think it's also very easy to think, okay, freelance, I can manage my own time and I can do things in the middle of the day and, be with my kids more. And that is all fantastic. But there are a lot of things that you don't have to think about when you're an in-house person that you do.
Absolutely.
So
and I have a ton of freedom as a freelancer. I happened to work for companies that were very flexible before. So it's not like I was working a very tight 9-to-5 type of job and then suddenly had all this freedom. I did have freedom previously, but the amount of work I do as a freelancer is far less than I was doing at a marketing agency, and I'm getting paid far more. So if you can make it work, if you can get the clients and charge the amount that you want to charge, it is a great lifestyle. I have time for my own projects. I write on Substack, I write on Medium, just things that I enjoy doing. And I have time to do those things because my freelance life isn't all encompassing.
I love that. That is such a great note to end on, Anna. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm sure we will have things to talk about on the show again, so this won't be the last time. But follow Anna on LinkedIn. She produces some brilliant content. Also on TikTok. I love Anna's TikTok. It's juicy. But anyway, I'll put all those notes. I'll put all those links in the show notes, and I am gonna wrap up before I make any more embarrassing bloopers. Okay, I've forgotten how to talk. Anna, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for checking out this episode of The Anonymous Marketer. This show is part of Marketers in Demand, a network of podcasts featuring the world's leading B2B marketers. Unlock your full potential as a B2B marketer by going to marketersindemand.com.